In the Appalachian Hills during the 1940s, there was one woman who had the community's full trust. Her name was Clara Hensley. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't trained in medicine, but she had delivered more children than anyone else in the county. Back then, hospitals were far. Roads were rough. When the birth pains came, families lit lanterns and sent someone to run through the woods to fetch Clara. She arrived with her leather bag, her calm voice, and her hands that everyone said had the gift. People believed she was chosen for the work. Mothers asked for her by name. Fathers told stories about how she never lost a child. In a time where childbirth often ended in tragedy, Clara was considered a miracle worker. But the truth was different. Clara wasn't saving lives, she was collecting them. Before we go deeper, I want you to comment down below where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are right now. The first time it happened, no one questioned. It was the Johnson family's first child. Their baby was born too early, weak and barely clinging to life. His chest rose and fell once before going still. His tiny fists never clenched. His skin carried the pale blue tint of death. His parents wept, already mourning before he had a name. But Clara Hensley, the midwife, didn't mourn. She leaned close, pressing her ear to the baby's chest, her fingers on his paper-thin skin. And then she said words no grieving parents could refuse. "He isn't gone, not yet, I can take care of him." Her tone wasn't pleading, it wasn't uncertain. It was steady, certain, the voice of a woman who had delivered hundreds of children. To them, Clara was the authority. If she said the child wasn't gone, then they believed it. The father's jaw trembled. The mother, exhausted from the labor, clutched her blanket and nodded weakly. Without waiting for another word, Clara wrapped the infant in a thin cloth, slid him into her leather bag, and left the cabin with quiet steps. That night, people passing by her house reported something strange. At first they thought it was a kitten, a faint, fragile cry carried on the cold air. But it didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like a baby. The sound was short and broken, like a child gasping for air through lungs too small to survive. The cries continued for several nights, always at odd hours, always drifting faintly from the dark windows of Clara's home. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. When Clara returned to the Johnsons, she told them the child had passed peacefully, that she had buried him herself on the hill by the pines. She spoke with such calm conviction that they didn't question her. In those days, infant death was common. Families didn't ask for coffins or graves they never saw. They trusted the midwife to handle what they couldn't bear. But no one ever found a marker, no mound of earth, no grave at all. The Johnson baby vanished as though he had never been born. And that was how it began. One child carried away under the promise of mercy. One secret kept in a jar. Clara Hensley was trusted in ways most people could never imagine. If a woman went into labor during the day, Clara was there. If the labor came at midnight in the middle of a storm, Clara arrived with her lantern and her bag. She never refused a call. She never showed fear. She had been in the blood and cries of childbirth so many times that people said her heart was stronger than most. This trust made the whispers hard to speak aloud. But in small towns, secrets seep out like water through cracks. The first whispers were always about the sounds. Families walking home from church late on Sunday nights said they sometimes heard crying near Clara's house. At first they excused it. A midwife could be keeping a neighbor's child until morning. But the crying did not always sound right. It was weaker, shorter, almost as if the sound was being pushed through a barrier. Some described it like a child crying from inside a box. Others said it was like the noise a calf makes when it has no strength left. The sound came again and again, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes at dawn. There were nights when it lasted for hours. Then it would vanish suddenly, and for days there would be silence. Mrs. Porter, who lived down the road, gave one of the earliest accounts. One evening, she went to Clara's home for sugar. Clara took a long time to answer, and when she did, her face looked pale and drawn. The door stayed only half open. Behind her, Mrs. Porter swore she heard more than one infant. Not a healthy wailing, but several weak, broken cries rising and falling in uneven rhythm. It was the sound of life holding on by a thread. Clara's expression never changed. She pressed a jar of sugar into Mrs. Porter's hands before the woman could speak, then shut the door quickly. Mrs. Porter told her husband what she heard. He told her to keep quiet. To accuse Clara without proof was unthinkable. Another account came from Ellis, the farmhand who drove the milk wagon before sunrise. Passing Clara's home one morning, he saw her through the window. She was carrying something heavy in her arms, something glass that caught the lantern light. The liquid inside was pale and cloudy, moving as she walked. Ellis said he froze when he saw a small hand press against the inside of the glass. The fingers spread out, twitching before slipping down out of sight. Clara carried the jar down into her cellar and out of view. Ellis told this story at the tavern once. The men laughed at him, but no one truly wanted him to repeat it. There was an unease in their silence. The more they thought about it, the more they realized they had also heard things near her home, or noticed strange jars stacked against the cellar wall when they delivered firewood. People began to notice Clara herself changing. She was in her 40s, yet her skin remained smooth, her hair dark, her cheeks full of color. Other women her age carried the marks of hard work and grief. Clara looked younger with each season. When asked about her secret, Clara would smile and say, "God blesses those who serve life." Her words sounded comforting, but her eyes were cold when she said it. The whispers grew into patterns. Families who lost children under her care began to recall the details. Clara insisted on taking the child away. She discouraged parents from seeing the body. She told them she buried the child herself, and no one ever saw the grave. The stories lined up too neatly, but no one wanted to be the first to speak. To accuse Clara was to accuse the woman who had likely delivered your cousin, your neighbor, or even your own child. She was stitched into the lives of everyone in the valley. Speaking against her would tear the whole community apart. So the whispers stayed hushed, told in kitchens with the curtains drawn, passed in church pews during the sermon, shared in barns while lanterns flickered low. No one dared to knock on her door and ask, not yet, because deep down, they were afraid of what they might find. If you are still here, make sure you subscribe. The next part will take you deeper into Clara's secret. Clara's secret was not preservation, it was consumption. The jars were not meant to save the children. They were meant to keep them alive just long enough for her to take what she believed was owed to her. At first, she told herself she was doing the Lord's work. She convinced herself that every life had a purpose, even if that purpose was not what the parents believed. When a child was too weak to live, Clara believed she was chosen to carry the burden. She called it mercy when she carried the body away. But mercy was not what happened in that cellar. The jars lined the walls, each one filled with liquid she brewed herself. Neighbors often wondered why Clara collected herbs from the woods at odd hours, or why she purchased animal fat from the butcher even when she had no need for cooking. She would render the fat into oil, crush herbs into powder, and mix it with formaldehyde stolen from the town doctor. Into this she placed the newborns, their tiny lungs pulling faint breaths through liquid that should have drowned them. To Clara, the jars were second wombs. She whispered to them as she worked. She told herself she was extending their time on Earth. She told herself she was learning secrets about life no one else had discovered. But in truth, she was hungry. It began with drops of blood. She pricked their skin with her sewing needle, collecting what little she could into a cup of tea. She drank slowly, waiting. And soon, she claimed she could feel the difference. The aching in her joints lessened. Her hair no longer shed in the brush. Her face, once lined from years of work, smoothed over. She told herself it was proof. Drops became sips. She cut deeper, letting their blood stain her lips. She began to hum lullabies while she drank, rocking slightly in her chair. She said the taste was warmth. The taste was youth. The taste was strength. Each jar eventually grew silent. The twitching stopped. The faint hands pressing against glass went still. When one jar fell silent, Clara wasted no time. She prepared another. A new child would be delivered to her soon enough. By 1949, families in the valley began to notice how many children in Clara's care never survived. Sometimes it was one in a season, sometimes two, but the explanations never matched the healthy pregnancies that had preceded them. There was the Brooks family, whose child was declared too weak to live despite being born full term. Clara insisted on carrying the baby away. She told the parents gently that she would handle the burial herself. The family was left only with silence and grief. But 3 nights later, Daniel Brooks swore he heard his son's cry near Clara's cabin. The sound was faint, but he would have known it anywhere. He followed it to her home and stood in the yard listening. He said the cries came not from one infant, but many. He told Mary what he heard. At first she begged him to let it go, afraid of what it might mean, but Daniel could not. He returned a week later with a lantern and pressed his ear against Clara's cellar door. He said he heard movement below. Not just crying, but the soft scrape of glass being tapped from the inside. What Daniel Brooks found when he finally opened that cellar would spread fear across the entire county. If you are still listening, stay with me. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Daniel Brooks was not a reckless man. He was a farmer, steady and cautious, the kind of man who measured his words before speaking. But the night he pushed open the cellar door of Clara Hensley's house, something stronger than caution pulled him forward. It was the cry of his son. The lantern shook in his hand as he descended the steps. The air grew colder with every step, damp, heavy, thick with the stench of something rotten beneath the soil. He had expected earth, potatoes, jars of preserves. What he found instead was beyond comprehension. The lantern light spilled across glass, row after row lining both walls. Mason jars taller than a man's arm filled with cloudy liquid. Inside each one floated a newborn. Some were still, others moved. Their tiny fists opened and closed weakly against the glass. Their mouths opened in slow, soundless cries, as though the liquid choked their voices. Daniel's knees buckled. He almost dropped the lantern. He forced himself to look closer, hoping his mind was lying to him. But then one of the infants turned its head toward the light. Its eyes blinked. Its lips quivered. And from the glass came the faintest tap, like fingernails against a window. He stumbled back and collided with something in the shadows. Clara. She had been waiting for him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and shining in the dim glow. But what froze Daniel was her mouth. It was stained. Crimson streaks painted her lips and chin, and in her hand, she held a spoon. The bowl of it was slick with blood. "You should not be here," Clara whispered. Her voice was calm, almost tender, as if she were speaking to a child. "They are not yours anymore." Daniel's throat went dry. "That's my boy," he rasped, pointing a shaking finger toward the nearest jar. Clara tilted her head, studying him. "He was never meant for this world. He was meant for me." With slow, deliberate steps, she moved toward the jar that held Daniel's son. She pressed her palm against the glass and smiled faintly as the infant's tiny hand pressed back. "See? He knows. They all know." The sight broke something inside Daniel. He lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm. The lantern swung wildly, light dancing across jars of pale faces and twitching limbs. Clara did not fight back. Instead, she began to laugh. Not loud, but soft, like a lullaby hummed under her breath. That laugh followed him as he yanked open the jar. The lid screeched. The smell of chemicals and decay burned his lungs. He plunged his hands in, pulling his son free. The baby gasped, a thin wheeze of air cutting the silence. Daniel pressed the child to his chest, trembling, sobbing, but the relief lasted only a moment. The baby's skin was cold, its breath shallow, broken. The faintest whimper escaped its lips before its body went limp again. Daniel screamed, shaking the child gently, begging it to hold on. Behind him, Clara's voice wove through the cellar like poison. "You cannot take them from me," she said. "They are part of me now. Without me they wither, without me they die. Their lives belong here." She stretched out her arms toward the rows of jars, her voice rising, trembling with fevered devotion. "Do you see? This is eternal life. This is how death is conquered. I keep them, I feed on them. I am the womb that never closes. Daniel staggered backward, clutching his child. He ran from the cellar out of the cabin into the night. His cries tore through the valley until neighbors came running. By the time they gathered, Clara was gone. Her house stood open, the cellar exposed. Inside, they saw what Daniel had seen. Jars, dozens of them. Infants staring with glassy eyes, their lips pressing weakly against the glass. Some neighbors fainted at the sight. Others turned away, unable to stomach it. Word spread like fire. By dawn, half the county knew the truth. But Clara Hensley had vanished. No one ever saw her again. The jars were buried by the church, the cellar bricked shut. Parents wept for children who were never returned. Some swore their child's cries still haunted the woods at night. Others whispered that Clara still lived, that she had fled to another town, carrying one jar with her, feeding in secret. And even now, some say if you pass the old Hensley cabin on a winter night, when the wind dies and the air is still, you can hear it. A faint tap-tap from beneath the earth, like fingernails against glass. If you made it this far, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video might save your life. These are warnings, not tales. The truth you would ever dare to believe. Bye-bye.